Okay, we're going to begin our next story. It's called Thursday Was My Day for Stamford and Born, with perhaps Peterborough thrown in as well. The picture that begins this story is of my first Firestone company car, a 105E Ford Anglia, first registered in 1966. In 1969 it was replaced with a brilliant Ford 1100cc Mark I Escort, a real flyer this car. Regretfully, I had it for 3 years, covered over 70,000 miles and never once took its photograph. The year of our story was 1971 and I was just arriving at the National Tyre Services depot in Stamford. My week was split up so that I covered the whole of my area from just Lincoln City to North Cambridgeshire and North Norfolk every week. My job was to promote and sell tyres for my employers, the Firestone Tyre and Rubber Company GB. I visited every retail tyre store in my area, together with as many of the larger commercial users of lorry tyres as possible. The retail outlets were in the majority owned and controlled by other major UK tyre manufacturers. For example, National Tyres were owned by Dunlop. Associated Tyre Specialists were owned by the Michelin Company. Goodyear, the UK's third largest manufacturer at this time, owned a variety of retail tyre shops operating under different names. Most of the remainder were independent tyre retailers who had agreements with one of the major manufacturers on turnover, and this gave them sufficiently good buying terms to compete in the marketplace. In our area, Fawcett & Thorn were the independent retail company who bought the Firestone brand as their first and major line. Fawcett & Thorn were growing in Lincolnshire and spreading their wings further afield. At this time in the early 1970s, in my particular area, they had opened new depots in Downham Market and Fakenham in Norfolk, and a further depot in Peterborough itself. As Fawcett & Thorn were the major sellers of Firestone for me, I spent a large amount of my time with their clients, promoting our products. At the same time, I targeted companies who used tyres of the type that we made, but at present we're using a competitor brand. A good example of this was CNG Concrete, a large family-owned company who were themselves expanding throughout Lincolnshire. CNG had their headquarters in Stamford and operated 4-wheel and 6-wheel ready-mix concrete delivery vehicles. Cement mixers have a very high centre of gravity, which means that if driven without particular care, they could be prone to tipping over on sharp corners. In an effort to combat this problem, I began to visit the company to introduce them to a new kind of lorry tyre that Firestone were experimenting in and successfully developing. This tyre was the Super Single, a tyre that was double the width of an existing lorry tyre and fitted on a specially developed one-piece wheel. This one tyre and one wheel replaced the existing double wheel arrangement that was the standard fitment on the rear axle of all heavy commercial vehicles at that time. There was a considerable weight saving too, over 2 wheels and 2 tyres. These Super Single tyres were tubeless, saving all the extra weight of inner tubes and the accompanying bits and pieces. Tubeless meant less complications too. This could give the lorry operator more payload capacity, the chance to carry a larger load on the same vehicle. Their main argument for CNG Concrete was also greater stability on that rear axle, and indeed both rear axles with a 6-wheel mixer, with their high centre of gravity. Plus, as mixer lorries often left the road and encountered unstable surfaces on building sites, the wider single tyres on the rear drive axles gave far better traction and flotation. The cost of changing wheels and tyres on existing vehicles was high, but advantages were substantial. At Firestone we were developing two types of super single tyre, and our range was called the Duplex. One of these tyres had a special traction tread, a little bit like a tractor tyre. When in off-road use on construction sites, this tyre was proved to be superb. Due to its heavier, chunky tread, it was less prone also to punctures. I spent several weeks calling on CNG Concrete and going over all its advantages. CNG at this time had over 100 lorries all over my area. The chance of selling our tyres into this company was substantial. The CNG management did agree with my argument and could well understand all the advantages. However, my company had no incentives to offer them, and CNG already used a Goodyear-owned tyre retail company for all their commercial tyre requirements. Consequently, they approached the Goodyear company, who were also beginning to produce a super single tyre. Goodyear could well see advantages here, not only in supplying new tyres and wheels for all CNG mixer lorries, but in all the replacement sales for years to come. The business went to Goodyear. All my efforts were to naught. I'd sold them the idea, but they did a deal with the opposition. Now, after a little deviation, let us move on to my visit to National Tyres at Stamford. This particular day, I just pulled into the side of the road close to the depot entrance, when there was an almighty bang, and the front of the roof of the tyre retail premises was lifted off the brick cladding over the main front doors. The dust and mess was considerable, covering much of the surrounding area. I moved to go inside with caution, not knowing what I would be looking at. Were there any bodies lying around? Was that the final bang, or were there to be more? In fact, it was the only one, but that initial bang had been followed by a tremendous amount of clattering as various pieces of metal and rubber gradually fell to earth after being propelled into the air with great force. The force was compressed air, and I'd been fortunate that I'd not arrived a few minutes earlier. Morris, the very convivial manager of this depot, was out calling on clients. His tyre fitting staff had been taking a few short cuts in their endeavours. When removing commercial tyres from wheels, there are safety instructions that should be followed. These lads in the depot that day had their own ideas. They'd removed the locking ring on one side of the split wheel and turned the wheel and tyre over on a metal stand to knock the tyre off the wheel with a bead breaker tool. Evidently, so the story was told to me, the tyre would not budge. After lots of extra tyre lubricant and more hammering and jumping around, no difference. It was fixed solid. This often happened when the tyre had been on the wheel for a long time and had not been removed for any reason. In these instances, the tyre and wheel had to be placed in a safety cage and slowly inflated to encourage some movement. Compressed air is very, very dangerous. Everyone engaged in the tyre trade has received instruction regarding this at some stage in their early career, even me. The lads at National Tyre Stamford were fed up with this particular wheel. The boss was out and they decided to take a short cut. They attached the airline and began to blow the tyre off the wheel without any safety cage. It was still lying there in the middle of the floor of the workshop on its metal stand. It's the amount of compressed air in a restricted place, contained and under increased pressure, that is dangerous. Our lads that day had a very lucky escape. Quite suddenly, the wheel and tyre began to part company and jointly were launched into the air vertically at very high speed. Within a second or two, the wheel hit the steel girders supporting the roof of the building. The whole roof was lifted off its brick supports at the front, and then the tyre and wheel separated and fell to earth almost as quickly as they had been launched. Those commercial tyres weigh over 100 weight or 200 kilos. The wheel probably weighs more than that, so altogether there was getting on for 1/4 of a ton of rubber and metal flying around the building at high speed and out of control. Both bits landed not far from a client's car that was having new tyres fitted. He nearly needed a new car. Nobody was hurt, just very shocked, and a big lesson learned the hard way. Lorry tyres like these run at about £100 a square inch, some at even higher pressure. Somewhere in the past, around that time, I was told that if a commercial tyre and wheel were inflated to £40 a square inch, there was sufficient power if it exploded to lift a Rover 90 car 40 feet into the air. Now, a Rover 90 car in 1972 was a substantial beast, weighing over 2 tons. I cannot remember if those tyre fitters at NTS Stamford remained in their jobs, or who had to pay for the roof of the building to be repaired. The whole episode remains fixed in my mind as a lucky escape for all concerned. Happy end to the day. It was on one of these days coming home from Stamford, and perhaps a bit of Peterborough too, that I found my first Jaguar. It was on the forecourt of a garage in Market Deeping. Long before this town was bypassed, it had an attractive road right through the town. This was a garage I did not normally call on for my work. Firestone had agreements with certain petrol companies to help their station tenants to promote sales of tyres on the forecourt. These were normally Texaco sites. This garage was an independent and sold cars as well as undertook repairs of all makes. This was in 1971, remember. There, as I approached the garage, was a smart Jaguar saloon for sale. I literally screeched to a halt and reversed quickly. Even in 1971, this model was a dream car. It was a 1956 Mark I 3.4 litre in dark blue with lovely unmarked dark blue leather upholstery inside and lots of wood trim. Even in 1971 it was rare to see these cars for sale second hand. Owners normally kept them. It was fitted with the 4-speed gearbox with overdrive. Perfect. You can read or listen to more about this car in the story The Blue Jaguar. The price was good, if I remember, about £150, roughly 6 weeks' wages. I did the deal there and then, no argument. My, did I have a surprise for Ruth when I got home to New Bolingbroke, and very happy end to the day after once again battering my head against the stubborn owners of CNG Concrete. Before we leave, there are some notable facts about Stamford. The Mallard steam locomotive achieved its record-breaking run to gain the world steam speed record for locomotives on the old hundreds between Grantham and Stamford, and that record still stands. Blackstone Engineering were based in Stamford, one of the major engineering companies of the 20th century and builders of some of the largest boat engines of all time. Lord Burleigh, the famous aide to Queen Elizabeth I, built his home close to Stamford. The George Hotel at Stamford was the first home to the Stamford Shakespeare Company, who have a home now at Tolthorpe Hall, a little way out of the town. The Stamford Shakespeare Company are one of the leading groups of players in the UK, and their setting at Tolthorpe is probably the finest location for outdoor productions. Thus states a confirmed fan, an annual attendee of every single play, often twice in one season, for over 15 years before leaving England in 2008. On this happy note, we now conclude this story for now. So that's the end of this little story brought to you by Cracker Books, written and read by Keith Sanders. As you probably know now, there's no shop. All our publications are available for you to download free of charge. To date, there are over 200 of these audio stories. There's about 100 videos and to date 10 complete books. You can find all the links and details to all his publications on our website. The address is www.itsarumlife.com. The spelling is ITSARUMLIFE.com. itsarumlife.com. Hours and hours of entertainment there of all kinds. Do have a good look. And for the moment, thank you for listening.